Now let's look at those individually. All of your rights derive from property. If it's my land, if I own that land, I can walk back and forth all day long. And I don't need anybody's permission. If someone else owns the land, if it's my neighbor's land, I have to get permission. It's a privilege. Now, assuming that I have enough money, perhaps I can buy the land from my neighbor, give the neighbor, $3 or $4 million. They can go to Rio de Janeiro to retire. Now that I've purchased that land, do I have to call my neighbor in Rio de Janeiro to get permission to walk back and forth across that piece of property? No, because now walking across that particular piece of property is a right. And I've obtained that right by purchasing the property. There is a one-word answer for every question about the Constitution. And that one word is property. That's what the Constitution's about. That's what the Bill of Rights is about. That's what the American Revolution was about. Who owned the 13 colonies prior to the Declaration of Independence? Well, presumably King George owned all 13 colonies. Let you use this one, you can borrow Virginia, you can have Massachusetts, but inevitably the king could always take that property back. It was just on loan. King had never been here, but presumably we assumed that the king owned all of the 13 colonies. After the American Revolution, after we signed the Treaty of Paris, who owns the 13 colonies now? Well, it wasn't King George. It was we the people. We the people own the land. That's what the American Revolution was all about. This is all about property. The Founding Fathers, specifically John Adams, said that the moment the idea is admitted into society that the law of property is not as sacred as the law of God, and that there is not a force of justice and force of law and public justice to protect it, then tyranny and anarchy commence. So according to the Founding Fathers, the law of property was as sacred as the law of God. This is what everything is all about. The whole idea of having a government limited by the Constitution is to protect your life, your liberty, and your private property. That's the fundamental purpose. Now, occasionally I'll have people raise their hand and say, well, Michael, I don't own a farm, but I've got a right to life. Well, notice that I didn't say your rights are derived from land. I said that your rights are derived from property. I give another presentation, about a 1-hour presentation, called Who Owns Your Body? Very rarely does anybody show up. Why? Well, because it seems like a nonsense question. It's rhetorical. Today in Bloomington, Illinois, in 2009, we all understand, we all assume that every man, woman, and child owns his or her own body. That's the way we operate. That's the way we think. However, when they were signing the Declaration of Independence, we had slavery. The Constitution actually says, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, actually says Congress is not allowed to eliminate slavery until after 1808. So up until 1808, slavery was not only legal in the United States, but it was constitutional. Boy, does that make you proud?
No.
No, it's an embarrassment. It's a contradiction to the whole philosophy of life, liberty, and property. You cannot own another person. Not legitimately. But in 2003, there was a big tsunami in India. Hundreds of thousands of people died, maybe tens of thousands. But there were adults running around collecting up all the orphan children. Well, they weren't giving them ice cream and a warm teddy bear. They were collecting those children to sell them into the sex slave trade. Are those children being respected as if they own their own bodies? In many of the Middle Eastern countries, we have women walking around with these burqas. Do you think they're doing that because they think it's a wonderful fashion statement? Are the women in these Middle Eastern countries being respected as if they own their own bodies? No. So, what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to take it for granted. Don't take anything for granted. We have some really wonderful ideas documented in the Constitution, but those ideas are only valid if we live up to them, if we defend those ideas. And we must defend the idea that every person owns his or her own body. How many of you here called Mom to see if it was okay to buy a beer at the bar tonight? How many people had to get permission to drink alcohol? Nobody. It's a ridiculous idea. Well, if you didn't ask your mother whether you could drink alcohol, then where does the federal government get the authority to control your consumption of alcoholic beverages? Anybody remember the 18th Amendment?
Yes.
The 18th Amendment basically made alcohol unconstitutional. And so they ratified the 18th Amendment, and everybody in the United States stopped drinking alcohol, didn't they? Why not? Well, because it's a stupid law. It's literally unconstitutional. But, Michael, it's a part of the Constitution. Well, yes, I know, but most of the people in Washington wouldn't recognize the Constitution if you beat them with it. That's a recurring dream I have, by the way. So, eventually, Americans came to their senses and they repealed the 18th Amendment because the government doesn't have any control over your body. It's your body. You decide what you eat. You decide what you drink, whether it's alcoholic or not. And you should decide how you treat any medical problems that you have, not the government. Your body does not belong to the government. It's yours. So, again, all of your rights derive from property. And if there's any question about the Constitution, you need to know that is the answer, property. And we're going to win. We're going to restore liberty because everybody understands the importance of private property. I mean, if some of you and I went to France and we sat along the Champs-Élysées and we're watching the people walk by, and I reach over and I take somebody's croissant. Well, they're going to start yelling at us in French. And even if we don't understand the language, we're going to understand why they're upset. Even a 2-year-old understands the importance of private property. What's a 2-year-old's favorite word? Mine. Well, in 2005, the Supreme Court, acting in the role of government, decided that they were acting like 2-year-olds. In Kelo versus New London, the government decided that if you have property, we can take it away from you and give it to somebody else that they're going to pay more in taxes. Mine. I had 24 people call me and go, Michael, the Supreme Court can't do that, can they? Do you think these people were calling me because they thought the Supreme Court could do that? They called me because anyone with a lick of common sense knows that you can't steal property from people, especially if you're the government. And they were calling to confirm. So all of your rights derive from property.